Hey, hi everybody.
Lots of people here. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes. How about you guys? Can you hear me okay?
Looking good over here on the East Coast.
All right, great.
Well, all right, well, let's get started. First of all, thank you so much, Roger, for spending the time doing this. It's really...
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks for setting it up.
Yeah. And before we get going with some questions, I thought maybe I'd give you a chance to tell us a little bit more about your background. I think a lot of us know you first from all the articles you wrote for Yoga Journal about anatomy and postures and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about, maybe briefly about like your trajectory, like you're a neuroscientist, you're an Iyengar teacher, stuff like that?
Sure. Well, I started out, I was interested in how the brain worked ever since I was maybe 10 years old. When I was late in high school, my sister went off to college, and when she came back in the summer, she had studied Aikido, martial art, and she had this Aikido book, and it had this meditation exercise in it. It was basically pranayama. It was inhale for 20 seconds, hold for 20 seconds, exhale for 20 seconds, hold for 20 seconds. Of course, crazy. We wouldn't introduce that as the first yoga exercise ever for a person, but that was my yoga exercise. And I did it, and I thought, wow, this is really amazing. So that was yoga. Then when I went away to college, the first year, I got into a class on sleep. There was an undergraduate class on sleep, basically the science of sleep, and I was fascinated by that. And so the interest in the brain and the interest in sleep and the interest in how breathing affects you and so on, these all came together. I started studying yoga out of books. Asana, I just found some yoga books and said, I can try this pose and that pose. It's just, I was 17 years old, so I was just trying stuff. I had a background in gymnastics, although I wasn't really a good gymnast. I could stand on my hands, I could do a few things. So I was doing it, because it felt good, and so it just went from there. I didn't start Iyengar yoga until about 4 years later. I was studying out of books, and then got into Iyengar yoga, and went to graduate school. I focused on sleep and on health psychology was my major, but I focused on sleep and how posture affects sleep. By that time, I was interested in what happens when you turn upside down and why it's so relaxing. And I ended up doing my doctoral work on that, although it turned out to be, the study I did was what happens when you go from lying down to upright as opposed to upside down, because upside down was a bit too complicated, I found out. Anyway, so I studied that, went on to be a sleep scientist at University of California in San Diego, where I worked not just I finished up with my yoga-related studies, but I worked with the effects of light on circadian rhythms. So I did a lot of stuff with light therapy and helped to develop the first wrist actigraphs, which are the forerunner of the Fitbit and the Apple Watch. And so I did all this sleep and circadian rhythm work. But at the same time, I was always teaching yoga, and all the way from graduate school on, I was involved in Iyengar yoga, and just kept doing it. So I've had these two parallel tracks where they kind of converge, especially in the sleep area, but I'm also just interested in science in general. So anything that's science and yoga, I like to do it.
That's sort of fascinating, because I think a lot of us who teach Iyengar yoga have had other things we do a lot, but I think a lot of us are thinking, that's a lot to take on, like being an Iyengar teacher, teaching a lot, the sort of demands, the very tangible demands placed upon, all the things you have to learn to be a certified teacher and maintain, and be a scientist. That's something pretty impressive.
Well, it just worked in my life, and the good thing about the yoga is, by being a teacher, it forced me to keep up a good practice. So, I always say to people, if you're going to teach, just practice what you're going to teach, and then teach that, and that's just the best thing. And so I would always practice, because I have a class coming up, I can't I can't skip my practice today. I got to teach, and so it keeps me going, and it helps with the stress of doing science and so on, especially sleep science where you got odd hours and things. A lot of recovery time is needed.
Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about how you might incorporate some of that stuff, the sleep science, into how you teach?
Sure. Well, the sleep science in particular, it's so closely related to restorative yoga that I actually teach, how to use restorative yoga to help sleep. I teach workshops on sleep and yoga, but I also just teach, restorative, and it also fits in with the pranayama. So, what's an example? Well, my doctoral work was on the barrel reflex, which is this blood pressure reflex from the sensors in your neck and in your upper chest, and that's what the article is about that they talked about. But I won't go into that too much. But that's one way. Basically, when you turn upside down, it stimulates reflexes that don't just relax your heart, but they relax your brain. And you can put electrodes on a person's head and measure their brain waves and see them slow down during an inversion. And so that's pretty cool. And that's the objective side, that's the science side, but then the subjective side is what we all experience. You're tired, you put your legs up the wall and Viparita Karani, and boom, you're out. And there's a reflex there. So that was sort of one of the key places where I studied science and yoga. But the science blends with yoga just anywhere you look.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really amazing. So even like sitting, so here we are right now, we're all sitting up. Sitting up, people are doing. And if you're sitting, or standing, if you lean forward, you can kind of feel you're out of line with gravity. You're inclined forward, and your back muscles tense up. Now, we don't always think about it, but as soon as you lean forward, the back of your neck tenses, your lower back tenses, and if you lean back, your front muscles tense up. Well, that's just physics. Gravity points straight down, and you can use Newtonian mechanics and say, okay, if I'm inclined to this angle, how much force do the muscles need to exert to bring me back upright? So that's the science side. You could write down equations for it. But we do in yoga is we lean back and go, okay, I'm now too far back, my abs are contracting. I lean forward, now I'm too far forward, now my back is contracting. And you get more and more subtle, and you find a place where suddenly everything lets go. Mm-hmm. And there's minimal muscle work because you're really balanced upright. You've literally brought yourself into a true line with gravity. And there's this ground truth to the thing, which is both scientific, but it's really subjective. And suddenly your mind kind of quiets down. And you start moving toward, chitta-vritti nirodha. So the yoga and the science just blend seamlessly everywhere you look.
I was going to say, it brings to mind that effortless effort concept that, permeates Iyengar yoga, right?
Yes, and then effortless effort has this parallel in science, which is called the principle of stationary action, sometimes called the principle of least action. And you find that in physics. It's just a really fundamental concept that essentially, when a photon travels, it follows the path that requires the least action. And so there's this beautiful symmetry between what you feel in yoga and what Iyengar has, kind of told us to pay attention to, and what science kind of found by digging deeper from its perspective.
That is so cool. Now, I just think maybe it's worth asking, those of us who find what you're saying really interesting, could you recommend some things to read or study that might be good, like as a primer for those who maybe we all studied a little bit of science in school, but just to get a better grasp of that?
Well, so what I would recommend is to take one area of science that you're interested in. It really helps if you're really interested in something. Mm-hmm. You might start from something that you do in yoga and say, I want to figure out more about that. That's what I did with the inversions. I was doing the inversions, and it felt so amazing. I wanted to find out why. Uh-huh. And so that's one. Then that's what got me into. I didn't know anything about the barrel reflex except that it slowed down your heart rate. And I knew. So basic physiology is a good place to start. So if you take a class on human physiology, especially, it'll go through this is what your kidneys do, this is what your neurons do, and so on. Basic neuroscience is really helpful. And so that'll get you started. But then what you have to do, because there's no article or study that does this, is you have to take what you've learned in science and say, how might this apply to what I'm feeling right now? The science is supposedly objective, although science is now coming to the realization that there's always an observer involved in science. There's no such thing as true objectivity because the observer is actually in the system, whatever you're studying. But anyway, science is sort of looking from the outside and saying, I'm going to step back and take measurements and see what's going to happen. But yoga is all internal. It's all first person. It's, okay, I do this, or I put myself in this situation. What do I feel? Mm-hmm. And so the scientific approach to things is to try to get reproducible results. If I set up these conditions, what result do I measure? And the yoga approach can be done the same way. If I adjust my posture in this way, what do I feel? If I adjust that way, what do I feel? So the outcome measurement is what you feel. So you start with a scientific thing, some scientific fact, quote unquote fact, or the best we can do, closest we can come to a fact. And you say, well, how does that apply to me here? And so this is the dialectic, this back and forth. You have a thing that you're interested in to start with. Okay, why do my hamstrings not stretch, for example? Well, maybe I better learn a little bit about muscles, how muscles stretch, and you go into the science of that. Well, there's this thing called the stretch reflex. That when you stretch your muscle, the nerves say, oh, you stretched too far, bounce back, spring back, contract. Well, how can I, if I want to stretch, how can I make that stretch reflex kind of calm itself down? And then you start to read into the literature, and you read a study that says, there's this other reflex that inhibits your stretch reflex. It's, if you contract the opposing muscle, for example, like you have your hamstrings, you want to loosen them, you contract your quads, there's a spinal cord level signal that goes to your hamstrings. It says relax. So now I'm practicing yoga. What happens if I contract my quads really strongly? What if I contract them slowly? What if I contract them quickly? Because when you science, it says a lot of these receptors are change receptors. They notice a change in the stretch of your muscle. So if you suddenly stretch a muscle, it'll suddenly contract and then you go nowhere. But if you slowly stretch it, maybe it will do better. If you suddenly contract your quads, it'll tell your hamstrings to suddenly relax, which is interesting. So you can be in Uttanasana. You always know contract the quads. Right. You get a certain amount of stretch, and then you make a sudden contraction, your quads, your hamstrings let go, or they don't. You can say it scientifically. Yeah, there's a reflex that does that, but it may not happen for you on that day with exactly the way you practiced. And who knows, you might discover something new that science has never really looked at.
And it kind of speaks to this thing of like you are teaching. One is teaching a group of people to do Uttanasana, and obviously we have like this range of bodies. Some people, fold effortlessly at the hips, but the quads are kind of relaxed, soft, and they can just kind of flop. And then there's the really stiff man, let's say, who's like just dying. Having a really difficult time in Uttanasana. And it's like, it's interesting because I think sometimes we're faced with this dynamic in group classes, like how to give people space to experience these things. They're very interesting, but we have to find a way to give them room to have that. And it's sort of interesting because, just like you said, it seems like for us each day, like that sharp, quick engagement of the quadriceps might work amazing, and then other days it might have to be slow. And it's and I also find that people new to that action, that sort of ubiquitous action, often takes them some months or even a year to find the engagement of the quadriceps.
Sure, and this is another area in which you can look at the science and look at the yoga experience and try to find parallels. So there's a whole science of learning. And there's something called the primacy effect, which means the very first thing you learn is the thing you remember the best. But there's also novelty effects where you really react quite differently the first time you experience something than other times. And then there's how many repetitions does it take to learn, and that sort of thing. So suppose you took a deep dive into the science of learning. You just read along and you find, oh, that's something I didn't know, this primacy effect or whatever. And you might think, wait, when I was practicing this morning, that might explain why such and such happened. So the blend between the two is very natural. If you're interested in both, you just find ways that they interrelate.
Yeah, start from maybe a place, as you say, that piques your interest a lot, because then you're going to stick with it. You go down.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. The science of learning. I feel like this is so married to Iyengar yoga.
It is. I mean, Iyengar was in his own way a scientist, and ultimately, the original, the scientific revolution that came around at the Renaissance was just curious people. They called themselves natural philosophers. So there's all kinds of philosophy, and this is the philosophy of what naturally happens. There was no formal thing that was science that was separate. And it was just people being curious and observing and saying, what's happening? Now, the scientific method, the Western scientific method, did diverge from other philosophies in certain ways. But at its core, there's this sense of curiosity and careful observation and trying to figure out what's happening so you can do things and get good results later.
Mm-hmm. Now, could you speak? Did you travel to Pune? Did you have a relationship with Mr. Iyengar?
Yes. So I first met him in 1983 when I traveled to Pune for an intensive, and he was and I was I was in graduate school, but he knew that I was studying science. Mm-hmm. So he'd come to me and say, "You are a medical man. See how whatever," and he'd explain whatever was going on. Then when he came to the first Iyengar convention, which was 1984 in San Francisco, we had 800 participants in this very first international Iyengar yoga convention, and he came and the day before I guess it was at some point during the convention, I took him over to San Francisco General Hospital to the pulmonary lab just to test his breathing. How does he stack up on these standard pulmonary tests? And it was very interesting. And just the upshot was that for a man his age, he had a much, much higher lung capacity, vital capacity, wow, than you'd expect. He was way, way off the charts on capacity because, you see him, he just breathe in, breathe in, breathe in, and breathe out. On some of the tests, he didn't do remarkably well because of the problem, the nature of the test. So one of the things is called an FEV, or forced expiratory volume, where the instruction is breathe out as much air as you can, as fast as you can. So you take in as much air as you can, and you're supposed to breathe it all out, within 2 seconds or whatever. Just and you through the mouth, through the tube, and his whole thing is slow exhalation. So he didn't do remarkably well on that because he doesn't do this. It's not pranayama. There's no good reason to do it other than to do it for a test. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make you feel better. It doesn't make you healthier. So why? It's not part of yoga. So, and I'm sure he could have learned it. If once he learned what was to be done, it would have been better. But so he was unremarkable on some things. But the main thing that stuck out to me was just this incredible capacity. But then you can go online and there's a YouTube video, I think it's just called One Breath, mm-hmm, that he inhales. That was like I don't know if it was the same day but it was around that same day. It was in San Francisco.
Okay.
And it's just, what's amazing is that he can just sit there and smoothly inhale for 60 seconds or whatever, however long it is, and hold the breath and talk, and then slowly exhale. It's just remarkable stuff that it does. There's nothing that touches it in the respiratory science literature that I know of. Yeah.
Now, it must have been pretty interesting, in those sort of early years to get to study with him, and it's sort of like maybe a particular thing the way he taught intensive. So, I mean, I didn't ever get to go, but I heard that he didn't stop for anyone. He just kept going.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He would just, he knew what he wanted to say. He knew what he felt, and he just had this urgency to transmit what his experience was. And so I like to say in these lineages of yoga, there's the individual personalities of people, but then there's this truth that comes through them. And each one is the thing that makes a real guru is the guru is basically channeling, if you want of a better word, what has come before and then added something to it in some sense. Now, he would never admit to adding to it, but what happens is, each guru would say, well, my guru, whatever I do that's good, my guru taught me. Whenever I do bad, it's my mistake. That's a sort of a meme in yoga, right? But the truth is, he was such an insightful person. He was sort of a savant when it came to feeling what's going on in his body and being able to look at other people and see what they must be feeling and what they would feel if they did something different. And that's where he was coming from. So he's channeling this truth, and his insistence on stuff that's more his individual personality, right? So he would say things like someone would just not get it. He would show them something, and it would especially annoy him when someone acted like they got it or believed they got it, and they were totally missing the point. And then he would sort of go ballistic and say, you were ruining my art, and yell and scream. That I don't consider that yelling and screaming part of the yoga transmission. You always have to separate, the individual ego from the truth. But they're tapped into something really powerful. And one of the things I would like to say to just pass on is my experience is it doesn't matter the words he said. If you were in a class with him, he would just say stuff and things would happen in my body. And someone else could write down the words and give the same instruction, it wouldn't happen. Because he was just in the moment, he knew what he was trying to transmit, and I'm sure only a fraction of it could be picked up by anyone, myself certainly. But when stuff came through, it was like, wow, this is amazing. And I think that's what a lot of people on the live here have done yoga, and you just have this experience that there's really no vocabulary for it. It's just you do a posture, and when you're in that posture, this is right. This is what's happening. This is what's supposed to happen in yoga, and it's very difficult to put into words.
Yeah, I remember there was this anecdote. Richard Freeman wrote something about him. Maybe it was for his 90th birthday or 85th or something, but he said something about how some of the teachers he'd had in the past talked a lot about philosophy. It was in a way it was very dry, and Iyengar came into the room and it was the real thing, like a monsoon.
That's right. That's right. It's really true. And what's really interesting is, there's also great teachers. I mean, Abhijata is a great teacher. Gita was a great teacher. And each one of them creates their own version of the experience, but they're not him. They're transmitting too. It's fantastic to take classes with them. But you can't really replicate. It's funny because in the Iyengar method, as a certified teacher, you must teach in the method of Iyengar, right? Nobody can do it. It's impossible. You do your best.
Do your best.
Yeah, you do your best. And the thing is, what happens is our own egos, we try to do something, I think I can do this, I think I can do that. And sometimes we accidentally get it right. You tap into it. At the moment we're not really thinking about being the great teacher, that's when the great teaching comes through. And it may just be some inadvertent thing that happens. You're in an asana demonstrating and you feel something, and people just see that you felt it, and it's not even what you said. And don't do what he said, do what I just saw.
Yeah, there was Herbie Hancock said this thing. The pianist. Yeah. Herbie Hancock said this thing about Miles Davis. It was very similar. He would say these things sometimes that didn't. He'd lean over to him and say, "Leave out the butternote." It'd be yeah. But he kind of directed him to do something. They all sounded more amazing. Those amazing players sounded more amazing with Miles, and I feel like Iyengar seems to have brought the best out of people. So many great teachers that you meet, like yourself, who've been that are part of this culture, let's say.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I like it. It is culture, and that's a beautiful thing too, because this gets back to science. Is we as individuals are all part of a larger organism, as it were, and our culture is the amalgamation of all these people communicating, but each doing our own thing. So we each are competent in our own way, but together we're much more than any one of us. Just the way the cells of your body are each competent in their own way, but together they're all more competent in making a whole person. And this idea, this a thing called multi-scale competency, which is put forward these days by a scientist who I've been following called Michael Levin. And I strongly recommend science people take a look at Michael Levin.
Okay.
Amazing stuff, because he's talking about how cells have intelligence, and but individual cells don't know anything, but collectively they can do what we do as human beings. They can feel the whole body. They can regenerate parts of the body. It's just crazy what happens when you get a bunch of cells together. But the same principles seem to apply at the interpersonal level. So analogously, a society, like just a group, Iyengar Yoga teachers, which is this sort of loosely defined group, because we communicate with each other just the way we are now, we take away inspiration from each other, we study with each other, and we go back to the teachings that were written down. We take this whole culture and we move forward as a sort of an organism of our own, which is larger than any one of us.
That's beautiful. And with that, because we could go on and I could ask you lots of questions, because it's really great to talk to you, but I want to make sure that if people have questions that they can ask. So far no one's posted one, but now is the time if you want to send in a question. And you sent me a question from a student that maybe you could speak to.
Okay.
They had written to you about working with cervicogenic headaches.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So yes. So the question, as I recall it, the student wrote to me and said, "What do you know about cervicogenic headaches?" Cervical means related to the neck. Cervicogenic means originating from the neck or coming from the neck, and so headaches caused by neck problems. And then how can I practice safely? And she sent me some MRI results, just text of the results saying, there's such and such a degeneration here and a narrowing there and so on, that's what you get on MRI results. First thing I always say is I'm not a doctor and I can't give any medical advice. But what I can say is, knowing what I know about the anatomy of the neck, what are healthy things for the neck, and what might be going on here. I don't think anyone knows why neck injuries can cause headaches. There's ideas, maybe it's muscle tension, maybe it's the nerves themselves. The pain from the nerves gets translated, it gets interpreted as a headache. But ultimately, that's a whole range of realm of science I haven't really looked deeply into. It's really difficult. Headache is a difficult topic, and there's vascular headaches and muscular headaches and so on. But if assuming that the mechanical structural problems with the neck are generating the pain or somehow causing it, that the more you can relieve the mechanical problems, the more likely you are to have less headache. So the first thing is just elongation. So if I hold onto my head here and pull up, I can do this sitting up and get some lengthening of the neck. Now, by the way, if you have a neck problem, don't just throw yourself into these things. If you're going to do anything, take it really slow, think about it, and if it starts to hurt, just back off. So you have to be careful. But yoga, we don't typically hold onto the head and pull. I mean, sometimes. But if you're going to do something for yourself, what you can do is an inversion, upside down. But you certainly don't want to do anything that puts pressure straight down on your head, which goes through your neck, which is going to compress it. So headstand would be out. I would strongly advise people not to practice headstand. I'm not saying you will never do a headstand again. What I'm saying is, unless you deal with this problem, you should probably not do a headstand. And I'm also not saying, I don't know what would happen if there's maybe some person in the world who would have this kind of problem and try a headstand and it's resolved instantly. But I think it's very improbable and more likely to cause harm than good. So no headstands, but what you could do is go upside down, and anything that makes your head dangle, and not in no pressure, but gravity is pulling your head away from your body, so your shoulders are supported somehow, or you're supported by the pelvis. Those kinds of headstand variations, the topped-up headstand variations, could be quite helpful.
Like two chairs or
two chairs, and of course you need to be taught by teaching, the chairs can slip and so on. So you have to have it done competently, safely, but headstand between two chairs might help, or it could be that just pelvic sling, rope wall, hanging, hanging by the pelvis basically would help. It could be that, you know what I'm saying, just hanging upside down on wall ropes. It could be that if you go over a trestler and make an L shape, so your legs are propped and your torso is vertical, that might be it. And if you don't have any of these props, you can take Uttanasana. Well, if you're very flexible, you could do just a real Uttanasana with your legs straight, and your trunk is vertical enough that that's going to put some traction on your neck. It's not the same as hanging straight down. Each one of these things is going to put a slightly different angle, and this is where you have to just slowly try things and figure out, am I better off hanging from my pelvis, or supporting my shoulders, or doing a forward bend, and hanging my head. I probably would not recommend doing a back bend and hanging the head as a first thing to try, because the back bends can compress the back of the neck and cause certain issues. But you could do something like Uttanasana, and if you're not flexible enough, then you just bend your knees and you do a bent knee Uttanasana. And this is a good little tangent on this conversation. But in Iyengar yoga, we don't do bent knee Uttanasana. It's not a thing, generally speaking. But I've seen over and over again, Iyengar would do stuff. If he came in and said, okay, now bend your knees, everyone would bend their knees. And he would do that occasionally. He would do things that were quote unquote taboo, and he had some reason for doing it. And he'd say, now bend your knees, and he would show something, and then you'd end up doing a straight knee Uttanasana maybe, but it's not, even though the rules say you can't bend your knees in Uttanasana, and if you did it in your assessment, you'd probably get docked for it. It is because you're not Iyengar, you have to have a reason, right? But here's a reason, at least a rational reason to do it. If you're trying to put traction on your neck, you don't have these other props. You stand and do a bent knee Uttanasana, maybe you can get your chest on your thighs and your head really vertical and put the right pull on your neck. So for a case where you have a structural issue, that might be the thing. And so that's sort of the approach I would take to that cervicogenic headache, and that's as much as I can say about it.
No, that all sounds very sound. What do you think about something like bolster Setu Bandha, where the neck gets very long?
Sure. If bolster Setu Bandha, the back of the head would be maybe on a sticky mat, so you can put some traction on it, and really draw the shoulders back. So anything that affects the neck is fair game. I mean, Trikonasana is fair game. You go sideways and you turn. That's a really strong pose on the neck. Now, of course, because it's so strong on the neck, it might cause all kinds of trouble. Very likely, if you have a serious neck problem, maybe one side would be okay and the other side might be terrible. But why is it terrible? You start to go into it. Okay, there's a reason my neck is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. You go a tiny bit into the pose, you turn a tiny bit, you find a spot and say, okay, this is where the problem starts. And if I work here, I can send a signal to my cells to try to do something different. And this is where the Michael Levin work comes in. Sending a signal to your cells is a real thing. It's measurable. It's electrical potentials. And your cells all communicate just like your nerves communicate. They communicate through changing the resting potential and the membrane potential, which is the voltage of the inside of the cell relative to the outside of the cell. They can transmit this information to each other, and those signals, the pattern of cellular signals, not just one cell signaling another, but you get an ensemble of cells, and a bunch of them are this voltage, and then this goes over here at another voltage. That's like a paint by the numbers pattern that your body can interpret as a signal to do something, which is crazy. So how that translates into this neck thing is, okay, you have cells in there that can build new stuff. They can build new cartilage. They can repair bone. They can do things, right? And what you're trying to do is signal those cells to fix the problem. And so to do that, you got to tell the cells that there's something wrong. And the way you tell them there's something wrong is you go right up to the edge of where the problem is, and you go, this is the thing I'm trying to fix. This thing that I feel here, here it feels good, and here it doesn't feel good. I'm starting to feel the pain here. Now this feels better. Maybe if I try here, it feels a little bit better. And you experiment with it. And the crazy thing is that, and this is a bit of extrapolation, but this is how I like to think about things, is in Michael Levin's work, he's able to do some things in which he changes the electrical pattern between the cells for 24 hours. And that's enough of a signal to get the cells to keep go on a whole different path. It's like they switch their path, and now they start building different tissue, literally.
Wow.
And for the next year, you've told them, you've given them an instruction, and the cells know what to do. So this idea that your body knows what to do, and all you got to do is to kind of coax it to do it, that's very compatible with Iyengar yoga.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to tell people who might be curious about this, Rosie Richardson posted a link to Dr. Michael Levin's website, if you want to read more.
Yeah. And I would say if you go on YouTube and look up that name, make sure there's a lot of people named Michael Levin, Dr.
Right.
Michael Levin. There are a million YouTube videos, and he gives a very similar lecture in many different videos. I mean, there's so much stuff you'd have to watch 4 or 5 videos to get it all. Mm-hmm. But if just look at any one of them, and you'll get the flavor of what he's talking about. But of course, he's working on specific things and very practical things, like trying to regenerate limbs. Which is able to regenerate limbs in frogs, like cut off the leg and it grows back, which normally doesn't happen in a frog. I mean, really crazy stuff.
Wow.
But the principle there is that there's a bioelectric signal. It's not an electrical voltage that you apply or a magnetic field or anything from the outside. It's just changing the way the cell's physiology works so they maintain a different voltage separation between the inside and the outside world of the cell. And you do that, and that is the brain's or the body's signaling system, the intracellular signaling system that tells the body what to do. And I loved it in the recent Iyengar convention in San Diego. Abhijata was here, and I can't remember the context. It was on the first day. She said, "You were training your cells. You were training the cells of your body to do whatever it was she was teaching." I thought, yes, we're training ourselves. It's just amazing that you can have that kind of insight and then map it potentially to this kind of other deep scientific work.
It is kind of far out that, I mean, I feel like that was Iyengar jargon all along, speaking to the cells, and it kind of turns out to be scientifically true.
There's a foundation there. It's just in its infancy, this part of the science. So I think it's a real revolution in biology. It fills in the gap between molecular biology, where you're looking at gene regulatory networks, gene expression, which is really important and really powerful, and then overall whole body physiology, like in medicine, like you go to the hospital and they measure your heart rate and your blood gases and things like that. Somewhere in between, there's this level where what the genes do gets translated into, I've got a cut in my skin, now repair it and make it just pure skin again. I mean, how does that even happen, right? And this is sort of the realm in which Michael Levin and now the people who are following him are working. But it's very early days on the science side. But I would hope there would be a convergence in which we can take that science and translate it into personal actions that we can do. Not just stuff you can do in a hospital with drugs and working with the electrical body in a medical sense, but what behaviors can you do that can make your body better? And it's got to be true. If the science on that side is true, and if we have our experience of yoga making us feel better and taking away back pain and helping us feel more rested and more alert, if you get those effects, and if the biology is true, then those effects must be related to some biology.
Now, I just wanted to take a moment to let people know, type questions in the comments if you'd like to ask Roger something. Meanwhile, One thing that I would like to ask you that is a little bit of a different kind of track altogether is like, do you still teach beginners?
Yes, yes, I do. I mean, my teaching right now is every week I teach an online class, just one class, and it's an all levels class, but it tends to be a fairly well. I try to make sure that beginners can do the stuff. Now, part of the reason is that I'm older, and so what's happened is in my years of teaching, first of all, I can't do the stuff I used to always be able to do, but a lot of my students have different disabilities that come up, so I get a lot of people who can't do stuff, so I try to make every class, those people who've been my students for a long time, always have something to do. Now, sometimes I'm not as good about it as others, but basically I try to give alternatives. And the other thing is the overall level is low enough that most people can do it. I try to teach basic stuff. Also, because I'm teaching online, there's a lot of things that I don't really adjust people. I just teach the thing I'm teaching more or less when I'm teaching online these days. I teach workshops. I have one coming up next week where I am in person and can adjust people. And those workshops are also online, so people can, because nowadays everything's hybrid. But really, when I'm teaching, I definitely teach beginners. And I don't even teach advanced poses. I hardly ever teach stuff that's advanced unless it's something that I can do myself. First of all, I can still do or could ever do, and second, if it can be propped up in some junior way. So, I don't teach Ekapada Raja Kapotasana. I could never put my foot on the back of my head. No, that's not true. I could at one point, but not for very long. I never was trying to be the extreme yogi, and I was never that flexible. But I could teach. There's some very, very foundational things, which is, if you're doing Virabhadrasana 1, you are doing a little piece of what goes into Ekapada Raja, and sometimes I'll break the pieces down even more. But so if I say I'm going to teach Ekapada Raja Kapotasana in my class, what I'm really teaching is some really simple movement that you. On the way there, the very first thing you do is sit down or whatever, and then you put your foot forward, and then you start getting into the pose. And I'll take people up to that point where you can't do it anymore, which is often almost unrecognizable as that pose, but it really is the path to that pose. So yeah, I teach a lot of, and then for people who are more experienced, we do practice, some things, headstands and a few variations, and a few things. I rarely teach arm balances anymore. Yeah.
It's interesting because I feel like the concept of Iyengar yoga is so broad. People can teach all so many different ways, and I think this reminds me a little bit of H.S. Arun was just here in New York, and I was asking him a similar question, like how does he incorporate beginners, and it was sort of the same as you. He doesn't really have like a separate class with different levels. He kind of puts everyone together and finds a way to make it work for everyone.
Yes.
I got the sense that he's after something like a particular angle on, what he wants to convey to people within yoga, if that makes sense. And I feel like sort of similar for you. You're conveying certain ideas, certain concepts that are very meaningful to you, and maybe maybe someone's really jazzed about like a lot of jumps and very advanced poses, but that's also part of it.
Sure. And if I were practicing those things, I would probably teach them. And so, I do some more challenging stuff, but my practice has kind of mellowed out a lot, and really my approach to teaching now is it's all about the experience. The experience comes first. What I want people to do is come to a class and have a beautiful experience. And what I try to do is practice it myself. I have some experience, and I try to transmit it. And that's pretty much it. And then all the technical stuff is I just bring in whatever asanas are needed and whatever instructions are needed. And and it's always limited, and I almost always come out thinking I could have done it better. But that's the thing. It's just trying to get the experience to come, trying to transmit yoga.
Beautiful. And can you talk a little bit about maybe, because I think a lot of us who teach are in this position now where there was a pandemic, we were teaching only online, we've moved back somewhat into rooms with people again, and like how have things changed for you?
Well, the first thing is I have a huge appreciation for how much better it is to be in a room with people. And it really it's just a different level. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I have a huge appreciation for how much you can actually transmit online. And so the adaptation has been how to make it work in an online setting. So that was the first adaptation when we first all went online and there were no live classes, in-person classes, how to make that work. And so I've built that foundation. And now when I go in person, then I try to do I try to focus on the things that you cannot do online, like physically adjusting people, seeing all the different angles, really seeing people well. Mm-hmm. Because part online, people's cameras aren't right, and it's also an interruption, especially if it's a big group. You can't really address the individuals without kind of losing the group. So it's a different experience. So I'm trying to create experiences for every class, so you could even watch it on video afterwards and have the experience and not get sidetracked. But that cuts out a lot of the stuff that happens in person when someone's doing something in the moment. I walk over and say, well, what about this? Or, move here, and I just touch, there, and the person changes. And someone watching, that transmission it goes through what's called mirror neurons in your brain, in which you have a representation in your brain of that person's body and what they would feel, which is related to your own sense of your own body. And when that person's ribs move, you almost feel the touch on your ribs, and you get the response in your body. You generate your own response, and you get an adjustment. And that sort of thing, when it happens live and someone's there, then other people in the room can see it. Well, that sort of can be transmitted visually online. Now, the actual feel of being touched, that of course doesn't happen.
It's mirror, like a mirror
neurons, yes.
Like
so
a mirror neuron.
That's why we like to watch people do really cool stuff, on a video, because you kind of almost imagine yourself doing it, not explicitly, but if someone's flying, you kind of can get a sense at least of somehow. And of course, it works in the negative sense. If someone does something that hurts himself, it hurts to watch it. You want to like to watch it because we're kind of figuring out how it might feel if it were us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's what do you call it? It's interesting because it's interesting that you said that when you give the adjustment, you have a feeling in your body.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing is, and I've made this mistake more than once, is if I'm not really feeling it right, I'm giving the adjustment sort of for the wrong reason, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work for either person. It doesn't work for any. So it has to be, when you're giving an adjustment, there has to be some grounding, some tracing back to the essence of yoga, and some intention there. And then even if you do it incorrectly, if the intention is right, it's still not as bad as if you did what looks like the correct adjustment with the wrong intention. Somehow that gets transmitted. And so you have to be, but the beauty is, just like when we practice, we pay attention to what happens and adjust according to our feeling. When you're adjusting another person, if you apply that same principle, then it's a win for everybody.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's interesting because I think in recent years, people have felt like maybe a little nervous about adjustments because of all the controversies and stuff like that.
Yes.
But I feel like maybe people are coming around to them again because I've had students, let's say, over 45 or over 50 tell me, I really miss being adjusted.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it used to be like a big reason to come to class. And I think that maybe this leads to a good question. Like, how are you managing with stuff like that in this sort of sensitive time?
Sure.
You seem like you have a good handle on it.
That's a great question and a sensitive topic. But of course, now that I'm teaching less in person, it comes up less, but it's still it's there. I like to go back to Abhijata gave a great speech about this. I think it was 2019 in Texas. She came to Texas, did a convention there. I guess a convention there. I wasn't actually at that convention. I somehow missed it. It's the only one I missed, actually, of all the conventions.
Oh, wow.
It was an oversight on my part. I had the date wrong. Anyway, the speech is recorded, and she was talking about actually there's a Me Too experience that she had in her life. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's something. Yeah. But then I think it's in that speech. And we had a lot of meetings about the whole topic around the same time, and so I can't remember exactly where I learned this, but she basically said, look, this is Iyengar yoga. There are adjustments. There are going to be adjustments. Live with it. And her saying that as a woman, especially a young woman who had this experience, that was very powerful to me. It's like she's giving a certain level of permission, but we're not just permission, but no, you have to adjust. But but you have to be true. And that's what when I was referring to the wrong intention, I wasn't referring to that kind of intention, but that would be like an extreme case of it. That's you got to be coming from a place where your intention is correct. And then, of course, you got to be sensitive to the people. They have to give you their permission. You have to have permission. Now, there's the actual social interchange that happens needs to be explicit enough so you really know that you have that permission. Don't just don't get cross signals like, oh, I thought I had permission, and that's a mess. Right? It has to be explicit. On the other hand, it can become so exaggerated that that's uncomfortable.
Right. That's been my experience.
And that's very difficult. So for example, you can't adjust someone without asking their permission, right? So let's suppose you go to someone in a class and say, may I, I see that your head is out of position. May I touch your head and push the back of your head up? And they say, sure. So you do it. Good. And then a little while later, you come over and say, well, your head's off to the side a little bit. May I touch your head and push it off to the side? And the third time, how many times do you do that, right? So it can't be done to a ridiculous degree. On the other hand, if you just come over and take hold of somebody's head and move it, that doesn't fly. That's for anybody. You really want to have a communication, and I'm not unfortunately particularly skilled at that kind of communication, but I'm just cautious about it.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I've had that experience where I don't feel like I ask to the point where it gets ridiculous, but I do feel sometimes that always asking, like very explicitly like that, can create this feeling like maybe it isn't going to be good. Maybe there's some doubt,
Yeah. And also, yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, all I was going to say was to that point, I've had older teachers who kind of built their like repertoire of adjustments on this sort of element of surprise, like watching very carefully. I had a teacher that was so masterful at it, and when he would go to adjust, it was like incredible, like a martial arts, like this moment.
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes if you ask, and I guess now we're kind of like tasked with getting affirmative consent, but you always ask, sometimes people might tense up before you turn their shoulder.
Sure. And so yeah, I don't have a magic solution to the problem, but my intuition is you want to have a sort of a strong, explicit contract backed by an implicit contract. The explicit contract is, suppose, and I'm just sort of brainstorming here, suppose you have classes of people that you see repeatedly, and you say, when people first come in, look, I give adjustments in this class. This is what it looks like. I might do this, I might do that. This is part of the class. Is it okay if I do that? And then, at the beginning, especially if someone's relatively new, you are very cautious with them, and you may ask them, this is what I do. Is this okay? But you get to a point where they know you're going to do it, and they've already given their consent, right? and it's just part of the picture. But the worst case is someone who doesn't even realize it's part of the package, and then you just do something which is, well, of course, the worst case is you don't have the right intention, but a bad case is you do something with the right intention, but someone misinterprets it because they haven't been prepared in that way, and that's just what we call in yoga a mistake to be avoided. Pain that can be avoided should be avoided.
Right.
So you do your best to head it off.
Wow, that sounds like a good way to do it. So, well, listen, we've been going for about an hour, and I just wondered, is there anything that you wanted to let people know about that's going on for you that's coming up?
Well, this coming weekend, the 28th and 29th of October, I'm teaching a workshop on restorative yoga and pranayama together. And that's in San Diego, and that's a live event and also online. So it's a hybrid, so you can take it online or live. So if you're interested, just look me up on the web, Roger Cole Yoga, and rogercoleyoga.com, and then it'll link you to another site where you can register if you're interested.
Okay, great. And you have your website, and you're here on Instagram and other social media, I assume.
Yes, on Facebook as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
And
so one other thing, just because we didn't mention it, Iyengar Yoga, the light is now on Substack. You want to talk about that?
Yes, maybe we can take a minute to talk about that. So the light is now on Substack. We just released Roger's great article that you can read. I think it looks fantastic, by the way.
You did a good job. You did a good job putting it up there. It's great.
So we'll thank Skylar Christensen for putting that stuff up, and I would like to give a shout out to my colleague William as well, who it's simple as Substack is to use. It took some effort to get that going, so sign up with the light on Substack and read Roger and others' articles and submit to me publications at IYNAUS if you want to write. And we may be expecting something in 2024 from you.
Yeah, I'm writing an article. You and I can talk about that online.
But we'll look forward to more good stuff. And
take a science topic and go with it and make it into a practice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Roger, for talking.
Thanks, and it's been a pleasure. And thanks to everybody who joined us on the live. And that's it. Are people going to be able to see this afterwards? Is this going to be up on the lineup?
Yes. So This will be archived on our Instagram as a reel. So it'll be up probably within 5 minutes. And then we'll probably repost it in other places, maybe even on Substack.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
Okay. Have a great day.
You too. Bye, everybody.
Bye.